why you shouldn't follow the news or trust the news. Hi, this is Charlie giving you Wednesday's video, and I'm recording this actually Tuesday evening. I just thought of this today. There's an old saying in the markets: show me the charts and I'll tell you the news. So I thought we'd just go through a couple of examples of just that. Now, over the last few months, obviously, we've had the whole coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, and we've had some pretty wild moves on the euro dollar here to start off with. And let's just see what the news was saying. Down at these lows was right down at around about the 19th, 20th of March. And so I just googled some news stories headlines just earlier on, and we see that there's a story here. I've made it too big. There's a story here that says the Fed moves to ease strains as the dollar demand surges. And it says down below the US central bank has moved to ease global currency strains as concerns about global recession prompts a surge in demand for the US dollar. So now it's not that that's not correct, because there had been a surge in demand as the euro dollar came down. But it's funny, isn't it, how when you get these big moves, these sorts of news headlines which sort of create fear and in investors thinking, oh right, I've got to buy more dollars or whatever, just at a time when maybe that's not the case. And if I go to the pound dollar now, and I found another BBC article around the same time actually, 18th of March, pound plunges to its lowest level in over 30 years. The pound has fallen, you probably can't quite see that, let's bring it up, fallen to its lowest level against the dollar since 1985 as the spread of the pandemic spooks investors. Again, it's correct, it's saying what's happened, but usually by the time we get these sorts of moves, again, those articles are on the 18th or so of March. Blimey, the BBC has a great track record there of of getting the bottom, hasn't it? So what do we do when it comes to news? Because we're bombarded by news. Some of it's short-term news on a day-to-day basis as to what may be happening economically or whatever, and there's always news stories coming through, and we have to filter all that out. The reality is, do we actually need the news? Do we need this information? Because if we're technical traders, now not all traders are, but if you're a technical trader, you don't really need the news. You backtest your strategies and then you go and trade them, and then when you're trading them, you're using them in line with news and looking at news events. Now, don't get me wrong, that's still important, because you might be putting trades on around key news events and you could still get slippage depending on where your stops are going to be. But in the main, we really don't need news. Let me give you another example. If I take you to the euro dollar and I put it onto a weekly chart, I'll just wind it back to 2017. I was being interviewed right around this time, might have been late 2000. It was either December 2016 or it was January 2017. And I remember being interviewed at this time, and at this point, and I'm sure many of you will remember, that all the talk in the financial press was about the euro dollar going to parity. And yet it bottomed out around that 103, 104 zone and then took off. Now, what we can say technically with this is that there've been, if you can see my old horizontal line up here, multiple tests of this zone up here. Then we came down, took out the lows, only to then turn it back up, and then away it gradually went. That gap, by the way, was in the April, and that was when Macron was elected. But even as it started to turn up, because I was trading this, I was long euro dollar, right from the early part of 2017 there, because my own analysis was telling me to buy, and yet it felt hard because you get caught up in the news. You're bombarded by this news, and I have to try to put all that information to the back of my mind. I have to be aware of it, but at the same time try not to allow it to influence my trading decisions. So it was a hard trade. You can look at it now and say, oh, that was an easy trade. It's not. It's a difficult trade at the time. Started moving in my direction. Bearing in mind this is a weekly chart, so but even as it started moving in my direction, do you not think that what the news was doing on these 2 weeks here, there was news reports coming out because I was trading through all of this and this pullback here, news reports which were you know negative supposedly for the market, and yet it managed to shrug it off because the euro dollar wanted to go higher for other reasons, and yet constantly you're being bombarded by news which is saying why the euro dollar is still going to roll over and go to parity, and then bit by bit as it goes higher, then the news they adjust their forecasts, whether if it's analyst type news coming out, or a bank or whatever coming out with its predictions for euro dollar. But certainly I can tell you this right now, I don't recall any of those banks, any of the main banks, saying back down here in 2017 that they felt that the euro dollar was going to get back up into the 120s. So I think that the best thing you can do as a trader, and fun enough, I was trading this point here in early 2018 with our swing traders. We were shorting up at this point, but that then felt uncomfortable because what was I being met with as far as the news was concerned? That news stories were starting to come out, or I say news stories, but the financial news and bank, that includes obviously banks, were starting to talk about the euro dollar heading to 130 or higher. And so again, if you're following the news too intently, that can scupper your trading. The one thing with the trader is you're trading based on probabilities, risk, reward, pretty much. So what the news does, and if you're wrong, does it matter? And that's what we always have to remind ourselves. If you're wrong, it doesn't matter. You have a stop loss and you get stopped out. It doesn't matter. You're not an analyst who's supposed to be making calls and sitting there on CNBC and being right all the time. We don't have to be right all of the time as technical traders. We only have to be right a given percentage of the time. So I think it's just one of those things to be conscious of and be self-aware of how you're absorbing any major news at any point in time relative to the stock markets, relative to gold, for example, as well. That's a classic one because there's lots of news around the precious metals as well, and oil. A lot of these markets, and obviously anything around the dollar usually as well, or euro. And just when you are taking this news on board, be careful that it's not influencing you in how you trade and the types of setups you take. Because how many of you have taken or would have taken setups but didn't take them because the news at the time seemed to suggest that the market was going to go off in a direction which wasn't the direction of your trade. So you've ended up being influenced by whatever that news is. And I'm sure many of you can probably say, yeah, that, hold my hand up, yeah, that's happened to me many a time, Charlie. So I just think it's one of those things that sometimes we have to take stock and say to ourselves, do I need this? Do I need this information? Can I cut back on elements of news? And or if I am taking it on board, I have to, because it's part of my job, because people always ask me questions about what's going on in the markets, and so you find yourself having to talk to them from a news perspective. But the reality is, if you're a technical trader, do you need the news? Anyway, as always, by all means, do give us a thumbs up and a subscribe if you like the videos. And I always welcome your comments if you've got any thoughts on what I've just said there. I've just just breezed over a couple of examples there, but I'm sure you have some great examples as well. So do get back to me on the comments. Take care for now.